Applause from the tariff debate fading, but the energy in the air remained electric. Mel Gibson sat upright, his gaze calm yet piercing like a fighter who'd survived the first round and was ready for the next. Whoopi Goldberg, though maintaining her composed exterior, gripped the table slightly, her eyes glinting with determination to reclaim the upper hand. Goldberg took a deep breath, her voice lowering, taking on a grave tone. Mel, you talk a lot about jobs, but let's be real, you're one of Trump's most vocal supporters. A president many say is dividing America. Are you proud to stand behind him? The question was like a dagger aimed at Gibson's political loyalty, making the audience gasp softly, awaiting his response. Gibson tilted his head, his gaze steady, but a faint smile flickered as if he'd anticipated this move. I support anyone who puts Americans first. Whoopi, Trump's not perfect, but look at the results. Before the pandemic, U.S. unemployment hit a 50-year low. 3.5% black workers, women, and minorities had more stable jobs than ever. That's why I back his policies, not the man himself. His response was clear, grounded in data, but carried the weight of someone who thought it through. The audience murmured, some nodding, swayed by the specificity. Goldberg, not letting Gibson gain the upper hand, leaned forward, her voice sharper. But politics isn't just numbers. Mel, Trump has fueled division. His speeches, his immigration policies. Don't you see that hurting the country? Or are you just worried about your own wallet? Question was personal, meant to push Gibson into a corner, and a few audience members clapped in approval. Gibson remained calm, his fingers lightly tapping the table, his gaze sweeping the audience before returning to Goldberg. Division comes from both sides. Whoopi, I've traveled across America, from small towns in Ohio to big cities like Los Angeles. People don't want to argue about speeches. They want jobs, safety, and a future for their kids. If Trump delivers that, I support him, but I've criticized him when needed, like how he handles the media. I'm not blind. He paused, his voice lowering. What about you? Have you ever wondered if this show fuels division by only inviting people who share your views? Gibson's question was like a bomb, igniting cheers mixed with laughter from the audience. A man in the back row stood clapping, his eyes blazing. Goldberg froze, her lips pursed, clearly caught off guard by the counterattack. Aha, quick as a whip jumped in to salvage the situation. Oh, Mel, don't pretend to be neutral. You Trump's guy, and everyone knows what he stands for. Conservative, outdated. You think the world's going back to your era. Her tone dripped with sarcasm, but her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. Gibson laughed, a short but confident chuckle. Joy, I'm not trying to turn back time. I want an America where people are heard, not dictated to by the media or shows like this. I've been making films for over 40 years, and I've learned one thing: human stories, not politics, are what connect us. Trump, Biden, or anyone else. I only care about policies that help people live better. His response was sincere yet sharp, prompting the audience to clap again, this time louder, like a wave crashing through the studio. Host Hun, sensing the tide turning, spoke up with a calm but piercing voice. Mel, you talk about listening to the people, but Trump's often criticized for ignoring minority communities. As someone with influence, don't you think you have a responsibility to speak out when he goes off course? Her question was clever, targeting Gibson's personal ethics, silencing the audience as they waited. Gibson nodded, his eyes showing respect for the question. I do have a responsibility, Sonny, and I've acted on it. I've met Trump and called him out when I disagreed, like on how he handled some social issues, but I also see him do good, investing in poor areas, boosting job opportunities for minority communities. I'm not here to defend every choice he makes. I'm here to say we need to look at actions, not just words. His response was both sincere and logical, making host furrow her brow, unable to find an immediate flaw. The audience erupted, applause thundering, some cheering, clearly swayed by Gibson's candor. A woman in the middle row raised her hand in support, her eyes shining. Goldberg, feeling the shift in the crowd, tried to seize control. Mel, you talk a good game, but you can't deny Trump has hurt many people by standing with him. You're picking a side. Don't you see how dangerous that is? Her question was accusatory, aiming to box Gibson, and Gibson looked straight at Goldberg, his gaze unwavering. I'm not picking sides, Whoopi. I'm picking the truth, and the truth is every politician makes mistakes, but we can't let the media or shows like this decide who's right or wrong. The audience here is smarter than that. They want the truth, not a scripted drama. He pointed lightly at the audience, his voice low but powerful, as if pulling them into his fight. Whoopi Goldberg took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with intensity, as if she'd found her sharpest dagger. Joy Bahar leaned in, her gaze sly, while Sunani Hust adjusted her glasses, her fingers skimming her notes ready to strike. Goldberg raised her chin, her voice low. deliberate and sharp as a needle. Mel, you talk about truth, but let's face another truth. Your past controversial statements, allegations of anti-Semitism, racism. How can the audience trust someone who stumbled like that to stand here defending American culture? The question made the audience gasp softly, all eyes on Gibson, waiting to see if he'd crumble or stand firm. Gibson didn't rush to answer. He leaned slightly, his eyes reflective as if weighing every word. Then he looked directly at Goldberg, his voice low but heavy with conviction. I don't dodge my past, Whoopi. I've made mistakes, said wrong things, had moments I'm not proud of, but I've spent decades making amends, learning and proving through actions that I'm not the man of those mistakes. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, inviting them to look deeper. I made films like Hacksaw Ridge, telling the story of a soldier who rejected violence and the passion of the Christ, honoring the faith of millions. That's who I am today. The audience fell silent, some nodding slightly, their eyes showing empathy. Goldberg not letting Gibson win. Their sympathy fired back. Words are easy, Mel, but your statements hurt people, Jewish communities, people of color. You think a few films are enough to erase the past? Her voice was icy, accusatory, stirring murmurs in the audience, a few clapping in agreement. Gibson gave a faint smile, not smug, but the calm of someone who'd weathered storms. I'm not trying to erase my past, Whoopi. I face it. I've apologized, publicly met with community leaders and worked to build bridges. But let's talk about responsibility. You've defended people with controversial statements, like when you spoke about free speech on this very show. So why don't I get a chance to make things right? His question was an arrow striking at Goldberg's contradiction, making her pause, her eyes wavering. The audience erupted in applause, some cheering, their eyes blazing. Bahar, sensing the tide turning, cut in with a mocking tone. Mel, don't dodge the issue. You said unacceptable things. Now you want us to clap because you've changed. The audience isn't that easily fooled. She crossed her arms, her gaze trying to pierce Gibson. Gibson turned to face Bahar, his eyes steady. I'm not asking for applause, Joy. I'm asking to be judged by my actions, not past mistakes. I've spent 40 years in this industry working with every race, religion, and creating opportunities for thousands. If you want to dig up the good I've done too, like funding film projects for young black directors in Atlanta, or do you just want to keep me in the villain box to make it easy to attack? His response was both sharp and sincere, leaving Bahar silent, her eyes darting away. The applause roared again, louder, like a wave crashing through the studio. A woman in the front row stood, raising her hand in support, her eyes shining as if Gibson had spoken her heart. Post and playing, the rational voice spoke up to salvage the situation. Mel, I respect your efforts, but the audience needs consistency. How do they know you've truly changed, not just acting to save your reputation? Her question was smart, targeting Gibson's credibility, silencing the audience as they waited. Gibson nodded, his eyes showing sincerity. Consistency isn't perfection, Sonny. It's getting up after every fall, doing what's right, and never stopping learning. I'm not acting, I live what I believe. If the audience wants to know who I am, look at my work, the people I've helped, and the stories I tell through my films. They'll see a man who faces his mistakes and always tries to do better. His response was like a vow, making host lower her head slightly, unable to find an immediate flaw. The audience exploded, cheers echoing, some standing, their eyes gleaming. Goldberg, sensing the crowd siding with Gibson, tried to regain control. Mel, you talk about actions, but your past is still a big shadow you think the audience will forget just because you tell a few touching stories. Her voice was accusatory, but it lacked its earlier strength, as if she was losing ground. Gibson looked straight at Goldberg, his gaze unwavering. I'm not asking the audience to forget, Whoopi. I'm asking them to see the whole me, mistakes, efforts, and what I've built. If you want to judge me only by my past, you're denying everyone's right to change. And I know the audience here is smart enough to see beyond sensational headlines. The studio shook with cheers, the audience standing, applause crashing like waves. A producer backstage shook their head, whispering through an earpiece, his running the whole show. Goldberg gripped her hands tightly, her eyes betraying tension. Bihar and Ho sat silently, exchanging worried glances. Gibson, with calm but commanding presence, had turned a personal attack into a powerful counterstrike, leaving the view reeling. Gibson, still composed, adjusted his collar slightly, his eyes burning like an unquenched flame. Goldberg's voice was low but sharp as a blade. Mel, you talk about change, but let's look at the bigger picture. You support Trump, who many say threatens free speech with his media attacks and threats to sue the press. As a filmmaker, don't you see that as dangerous? The question was like a cannon shot aimed at Gibson's ethics, making the audience whisper softly, their eyes fixed on him, waiting to see if he'd stand or fall. Gibson tilted his head slightly, his eyes locked on Goldberg, a spark flashing, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Free speech is the heart of America, Whoopi. I've lived long enough to see it tested from Hollywood to politics, but let's be Clear free speech isn't the right to say anything without consequences. It's the right to debate, to challenge, and to defend your views. I don't agree with everything Trump does, but I see a bigger threat: media cherry-picking truth to serve their agenda. His voice was low, each word etched into the air, making the audience fall silent, hanging on his every word. Goldberg furrowed her brow, her voice sharper. Media cherry-picking? Mel, are you talking about us? The View is a place for debate, for asking questions. Can't you handle being challenged? The question was aggressive, meant to push Gibson onto the defensive, prompting a few audience members to clap in approval. Gibson smiled, a subtle but razor-sharp smile, like a swordsman ready to deliver a decisive blow. I welcome a challenge, Whoopi, but what I see here isn't debate. It's a scripted setup to tear down anyone who doesn't share your views. I've watched this show long enough to know conservative guests rarely get a fair shake. You call that free speech? He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, drawing them into the dialogue. I think the audience here deserves to hear both sides, not just a pre-edited story. The audience erupted in cheers, some standing there, eyes blazing, Bihar unable to stay silent. Cut in with a mocking tone. Mel, are you playing the victim now? We invited you here, gave you a chance to speak. If you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. She crossed her arms, her gaze trying to pierce Gibson. Gibson turned to face his eyes. Unwavering joy. I'm not afraid of the heat. I've made films through controversies, taken flack from all sides, and I'm still standing. But free speech isn't inviting someone on just to turn them into a punching bag for laughs. I've got a little gift to prove it. He signaled his team, and a large studio screen lit up, playing a short montage clips of The View attacking conservative guests, from interruptions to mockery sharply edited from past episodes. The audience was stunned, whispers rippling through the crowd. A woman in the back row covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. The clip ended with a question from Goldberg in an old episode: what's free speech if we can't laugh in the face of wrong opinions? Gibson looked straight at her, his voice low but resonant. Whoopi, if free speech is laughing in someone's face, then this show isn't a debate forum. It's a stage for performance. The audience deserves better. The studio exploded, cheers and applause crashing like waves, the audience standing, some shouting Gibson's name. A man in the front row raised his fist, eyes blazing. Goldberg, for the first time, looked flustered, her hands gripping tightly, her eyes wavering. Hostan tried to salvage the situation, her voice calm but urgent. Mel, you're attacking us, but free speech include the right to criticize. Can't you accept that? Her question was clever, but it lacked power. Before a crowd leaning toward Gibson nodded, his eyes showing respect, but his voice was unrelenting. I accept criticism, Sonny, but criticism should be fair, not a stage performance to take down an opponent. I've made films long enough to know a good story needs all perspectives, not just the director's. The View could be a great story if you dared to let the audience decide instead of steering them. His response was like a call to action, making Hostan lower her head slightly, unable to find a flaw. The audience erupted again, cheers echoing, the stage lights seeming to pulse with the crowd's heartbeat. Goldberg, sensing the battle slipping away, tried to regain control. Mel, you talk about fairness, but you're standing here defending a man who's called the media the enemy. Don't you see the contradiction? Her voice trembled slightly, as if she knew this was her last shot. Gibson looked straight at Goldberg, his eyes blazing, his voice low but commanding. I'm not defending anyone's words, Whoopi. I'm defending the right to speak, to debate, to be heard. If the media or this show wants to play gatekeeper of truth, then open the gate and let all ideas in. The audience doesn't need a guide, they need the truth, and I trust they're smart enough to find it. He pointed to the audience, his voice resounding like a proclamation. The studio felt like it had just been hit by an earthquake, the air still trembling after the climactic showdown over free speech. The audience stood, eyes sparkling, cheers fading, but the echo lingering in every corner of the stage. Nell Gibson sat upright, his gaze calm but glinting with a hint of pride, like a warrior who just vanquished his final foe. Whoopi, Goldberg, hands limp on the table, stared blankly as if trying to process what had just happened. Joy Behar, her silver hair disheveled, bit her lip, eyes lost. Sunani Hostan, hand resting on crumpled notes, bowed her head like a lawyer who just lost the biggest case of her career. Goldberg, in a final effort to regain control, cleared her throat, forcing a strange smile. Thank you, Mel, for a lively conversation. Audience, what do you think of what you just heard? Her voice was weak, lacking its usual charisma, and the audience responded with a wave of applause, but not for her. For Gibson, a woman in the front row stood cheering and raising her hand, her eyes blazing as if Gibson had spoken her heart. The applause spread, becoming an unstoppable wave, making Goldberg lower her head, her eyes betraying defeat. Gibson stood, adjusting his suit, his gaze sweeping the audience with sincerity. Thank you for listening, he said, his voice low but warm, like a man who'd fulfilled a mission. I came here not to argue, but to remind us all that we have the right to be heard and to speak. Keep seeking the truth. His words were like a proclamation igniting the audience again, their cheers echoing, some shouting Mel Mel, as if he were their hero. Biha, unable to stand it, cut in with a mocking tone, "Oh Mel, you sure know how to win a crowd. But we've got more to say, don't we?" She forced a smile, but her eyes revealed desperation like an actor who'd forgotten her lines. Gibson merely nodded, his eyes glinting with sharpness. "Joy, I think the audience has said plenty," he replied, his voice gentle but cutting, making the audience laugh loudly, applause ringing out again. Host Hun, playing the rational voice, tried to salvage the situation. "Mel, we respect your perspective, but the View is always a place for debate. We hope you'll return to continue this conversation." Her voice was polite, but her eyes showed tension, as if she knew the show had taken a fatal blow. Gibson smiled, his eyes sincere. "Sonny, if you're ready for a real debate, I'll be back. But next time, let the truth lead." His response was like an invitation making the audience chew, their eyes gleaming. Gibson stepped away from his chair, his stride steady, his gaze sweeping the studio. One last time in his mind, he recalled the days Hollywood turned its back on him, the long nights of self-reflection, and the journey to reclaim himself. Today, he hadn't just defended his honor but spoken for those overwhelmed by the media. As he left the stage, the audience stood, applause crashing like waves, lasting until his figure disappeared behind the curtain. A man in the back row shouted, "Thank you, Mel." A moment that shook the entire studio. Backstage, chaos reigned. A producer, face flushed, yelled into a headset, "Who let that clip air? We're done for." Another shook their head, muttering. Gibson turned the show into his stage in the control room. Screens flickered with online comments flooding social media. From Mel Gibson destroyed the View to Whoopi's out of her league. Staff exchanged worried glances, realizing this episode would be a media storm on stage. Goldberg sat silently, her eyes vacant, as if trying to process the defeat in her mind. She recalled the days when the View was untouchable, where she could steer any debate, but today Gibson had shattered the script, forcing her to face her own contradictions. Biha, her voice trembling, whispered to Host Tan, "We underestimated him." Host Tan nodded, her eyes showing disappointment, her hands folding her crumpled notes as if accepting defeat. The audience began leaving the studio, but the buzz didn't stop. A group of young women stood at the exit, animatedly discussing. "I've never seen anyone silence Whoopi like that," one said, eyes gleaming. "Gibson's right. We need to hear both sides." Another nodded, scrolling her phone to share the clip she'd just seen. In a corner of the studio, an older man with a proud smile said to his companion, "He didn't just win, he changed how I see the media." As the View studio lights dimmed, the storm from Mel Gibson's showdown didn't fade. It erupted outward, spreading like wildfire across a dry field. The audience left the studio with phones in hand, fingers swiping to share the moments they'd witnessed as Mel Gibson stepped onto the streets of New York. Sunlight hit his face, his eyes glinting with the calm of a man who'd completed his mission. But at ABC's headquarters, the atmosphere was chaotic, like a ship sinking in a raging sea. Just minutes after the episode ended, social media exploded, millions of posts flooded with emotion. One user wrote, "Mel Gibson just turned the View to ashes, who still calls him washed up?" Alongside the clip of Gibson landing his decisive blow with a montage attacking the View. Another account with thousands of shares posted, "Whoopi thought she'd take down Gibson, but he got the whole studio on its feet." Memes spread rapidly, images of Gibson with the caption, "Truth won the View 0," or Goldberg looking flustered captioned, "When you lose on your home turf." Social media platforms were swept up in the frenzy. Reaction channels uploaded analysis videos with titles like "Gibson destroys the View in 5 minutes," racking up millions of views in hours. A young TikToker with a witty flair reenacted the moment Gibson aired the clip, adding explosive sound effects that left viewers in stitches. Comments flooded in, "I never liked Gibson, but now I'm a fan." And the View just shot itself in the foot. Some users dug up old The View episodes, pointing out instances of the show attacking conservative guests, reinforcing Gibson's argument. The press quickly jumped in. Reuters ran a piece titled "Mel Gibson versus The View, a historic defeat for the talk show." Variety analyzed, "Gibson didn't just win the debate, he exposed The View's bias, stripping away its shine." Fox News unsurprisingly celebrated, "Gibson teaches The View a lesson in free speech." Even neutral outlets like the Washington Post acknowledged Gibson's showdown marks a turning point, forcing media to rethink how it handles dissenting voices. Articles quoted Gibson's line, "The audience deserves more than a scripted drama," turning it into a viral rallying cry. At ABC, the boardroom became a battlefield. Executives' faces tense, argued fiercely. A leaked internal memo to Deadline revealed panic. "We underestimated Gibson. This is the View's biggest crisis in a decade." Advertisers from cosmetics to food brands began pulling contracts, fearing damage to their image. A marketing director told Variety, "The audience is turning on the View. We can't take the risk." Within 24 hours, the show lost three major sponsors, a crushing blow to its budget. Goldberg, Deha, and host, now backstage, faced their own storm. Goldberg, usually confident, locked herself in her room, refusing press inquiries. A close source revealed she felt betrayed by the audience, but was also questioning the show's handling of Gibson. Deha, ever outspoken, posted a brief tweet: "We just did our job, people need to calm down." The post was instantly swarmed with thousands of comments calling her a sore loser. Austin, typically reserved, stayed silent, but friends told Page Six she regretted not preparing better for Gibson. While The View drowned in chaos, Gibson appeared at an event in Los Angeles the next day promoting his new film. The crowd greeted him like a hero with thunderous applause and cheers. A fan held a sign: "Mel, thank you for speaking for us." Gibson smiled, declining to comment directly on The View, but his eyes said it all. He knew he'd won in a brief Variety interview. He said, "I didn't come to destroy anyone. I came to remind people that the truth is always worth fighting for." The quote was shared millions of times, cementing Gibson's image as a symbol of resolve on social media. The battle raged on. Gibson's fans launched a page, Mel Gibson Truth Defender, gaining tens of thousands of members in hours. Post dissecting his every The View line from tariffs to free speech spread widely. Conversely, some of The View supporters tried to push back, arguing Gibson just played the victim, but their voices were drowned out by the wave of support for him. One post captured the sentiment: "Gibson didn't just beat The View, he made us question the media." As the day passed, the episode's impact became clear. Media analysts predicted The View would need to revamp its format or face long-term audience loss. Some loyal viewers expressed disappointment, one writing on Instagram, "I love The View, but they got it wrong this time." Gibson's right, we need both sides. Meanwhile, Gibson, with the calm of someone accustomed to storms, continued his path, his new film garnering more attention than ever. The media storm from Mel Gibson's The View showdown gradually subsided, but its ripples spread far like circles on a still lake. While social media and the press buzzed with analyses, The View studio now stood quiet, its lights dim like an abandoned arena after a fateful battle. Mel Gibson, back in Los Angeles, walked under California's sunshine, his eyes carrying the calm of a man who'd conquered his greatest challenge. But the legacy of that day didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to the millions who watched, who began to see the media through new eyes. At ABC, The View faced an uncertain future. High-level meetings dragged on, with executives debating how to save the show. An internal report shared with Variety revealed a 15% drop in viewership in the week following the episode, a figure that rattled remaining sponsors. The editorial team was forced to hold media ethics training sessions emphasizing respect for opposing viewpoints. Some loyal viewers remained supportive, but many others, through Instagram posts, expressed disappointment. "The View used to be where I found truth, but now I see they just want to win." The show, once an icon of American talk shows, stood at a crossroads: change or fade into obscurity. Whoopi Goldberg, in the days that followed, retreated into silence. A close friend told People that she spent hours reflecting, reading social media comments to understand why the audience turned away. Though she didn't publicly admit defeat, she began considering inviting more diverse guests. A small but significant shift. Joy Behar, with her outspoken nature, continued defending the show on Twitter, but her tone softened, focusing on calling for dialogue over debates. Tsunami host Ten, in a brief CNN interview, admitted, "We've learned that the audience wants fairness and we have to listen." These changes, though gradual, were proof that Gibson didn't just win a battle, he forced The View to confront itself. Meanwhile, Gibson continued his journey with remarkable calm. His new film, promoted on The View, became a focal point, with box office sales soaring due to the showdown's buzz. Theaters were packed with audiences not just watching the film, but supporting a man who dared to stand up. A Hollywood Reporter review wrote, "Gibson doesn't just make films, he tells stories that challenge the status quo," and The View was a vivid testament. He became a symbol for those feeling overwhelmed by the media, from workers in small towns to independent artists in Hollywood. In Gibson's mind, the showdown wasn't a personal victory. Standing on his Malibu balcony gazing at the Pacific, he thought of the days he was criticized, isolated, and his journey to find meaning through his work. He knew that day on The View wasn't just a fight, it was a reminder that truth, however hard, is always worth defending. A close friend of Gibson, in a Deadline interview, shared, "Mel didn't want to destroy The View, he wanted them to do better, and I think he succeeded." The story of Gibson and The View didn't end with one episode. It became a cultural lesson discussed in media classes, and online forums. Journalists began writing about the Gibson effect, describing how one person could challenge a media system with sincerity and sharp reasoning. An NYU professor told the New York Times, "Gibson reminded us that audiences aren't passive, they can shape the narrative if given the chance." As dusk fell over the View's now empty studio, the dim lights contrasted with Gibson on a Hollywood stage welcomed by cheering crowds. One side was a remnant of a faltering empire, the other a flame of resolve. Gibson's legacy wasn't just victory, it was a call for fairer media, a world where truth isn't twisted by scripts, and in the hearts of the audience he remained the man who dared to stand up not just for himself but for all who believe in the power of their voice. The story of Mel Gibson's showdown on The View deeply reflects the tensions in today's American society, where political polarization, media bias, and debates over free speech divide communities. In the current landscape, with social media platforms flooded with clashing opinions and the media criticized for steering public sentiment, this story is a sharp lens. Gibson, with his tight arguments on film tariff, political stances, acknowledgement of a controversial past, and especially his free speech counter-strike via the clip exposing The View, challenged a powerful media system. The audience's eruption from cheers in the studio to the #Mel Gibson owns The View dominating social media showed Americans' hunger for fairness and transparency. The crisis at ABC, with sponsors pulling out and ethics training sessions, reflected growing pressure for media accountability. Gibson's journey from facing mistakes to becoming a symbol of resolve is a testament to the power of truth in a society fractured by fake news and bias. The lesson in real-life America when facing injustice or criticism from colleagues, the media, or public opinion. Learn from Gibson. Prepare thoroughly, confront the truth, and turn adversity into opportunity. Just as he acknowledged his past and used actions to prove change, you too can rebuild trust with sincerity. More importantly, as Gibson urged the audience to seek truth, engage in debates with facts and respect rather than letting emotions lead. In a country that values free speech, use your voice like the audience that rallied behind Gibson to build bridges instead of walls. Hit subscribe to never miss dramatic stories like Mel Gibson showdown with The View. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video to explore more game-changing media moments. You won't believe what just happened on The View. Mel Gibson, the legendary action star and talented director, left Whoopi Goldberg completely speechless on live television, a moment no one saw coming, and the audience erupted in sheer excitement. It all started like a typical episode. The stage lights blazed, the audience clapped enthusiastically, and the host Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Barsunihan, flashed their familiar smiles. But behind those smiles was a carefully prepared plan. They didn't invite Mel Gibson for a friendly chat, they invited him to humiliate him. Whoopi kicked off the show with her signature voice. Welcome Mel Gibson to The View, Hollywood star, talented director, and the most controversial man right now. The remarks seemed polite, but her eyes told a different story. Mel walked out with absolute confidence, a sharp black suit, piercing blue eyes scanning the room. He sat down, flashing a subtle, knowing smile. And then the battle began. The View today wasn't a talk show, it had become a battlefield. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, the audience leaning forward, whispers rippling like an undercurrent beneath the glaring lights. Mel Gibson sat there, his sharp gaze locked on Whoopi Goldberg, who had shed a polite facade to reveal the focus of a hunter. The camera zoomed in, capturing every furrowed brow, every glance. Joy Behar smirked faintly, her eyes glinting with anticipation. Sunny host Ten gripped her pen, ready to strike. The stage was set, and the first shot was about to be fired. Goldberg leaned in, her voice smooth but laced with challenge. All right, Mel, let's talk about the tax policy. You're backing Trump on a 100% tariff on foreign films. Do you really think that'll save Hollywood? Or is it just a way to choke global creativity? The question landed like a punch, the audience buzzing, some nodding in agreement with her skeptical tone. Gibson didn't flinch. He sat comfortably, hands resting lightly on the chair, but his eyes burned with conviction. It's about protecting American jobs. Whoopi, Hollywood supports over 2 million people, from lighting crews to editors to set designers. When studios move production to countries with cheap labor, those jobs disappeared. Just last year, we lost 30,000 union jobs to overseas filming. Tariffs create a level playing field. His voice was steady, each word carved with precision, cutting through the tense studio air. The audience murmured, a few exchanging surprised glances. Goldberg raised an eyebrow, not backing down. But you're a filmmaker, Mel. You know art thrives on collaboration, not barriers. Tariffs will drive up costs, hurt independent producers, and limit choices for audiences. You call that good for creativity? Her tone carried a hint of sarcasm, as if Gibson's argument belonged to a bygone era. Gibson gave a slight smile, his eyes flashing with sharpness. Collaboration doesn't mean exploitation. Independent Producers are struggling because big studios flood the market with cheap foreign films. Tariffs for studios to invest here in American talent. Last year, 70% of major studios' budgets went overseas. If we keep that money in the US, we can create thousands of new jobs from sound stages to post-production. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, inviting them to reflect. A few audience members nodded, scattered applause breaking out. Bihar jumped in her tone, mocking sounds like you want to turn Hollywood into a museum. Mel, the world's globalized. Gibson turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. Globalization doesn't mean sacrificing American workers' joy. I filmed in Australia, Ireland, Mexico. I know the value of international collaboration, but when studios choose profits over people, we have to draw a line. Tariffs are that line. His response was razor sharp, leaving Bihar momentarily stunned, her eyes darting away. Goldberg seized the moment, her voice growing sharper. But what about the audience? Mel, they want great movies. They don't care where they are filmed. Tariffs will drive up ticket prices, hurting regular viewers. You think they'll thank you for that? The question tugged at emotions, and the audience murmured, waiting for his response. Gibson tilted his head, his eyes never leaving Goldberg. Audiences deserve quality films, and that starts with fair pay for the people who make them. If ticket prices rise a few cents to save thousands of jobs, I think they'll understand. Besides, tariffs don't raise ticket prices, they force studios to cut their sky-high profits. Last year, the CEOs of the top 3 studios pocketed over $200 million while set workers scraped by on temp contracts. Who's really hurting the audience? Whoopi. His response was a direct hit, sparking a wave of louder applause from the audience. Host Han, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice calm but sharp. Mel, you talk about jobs, but tariffs could spark a trade war. Other countries will retaliate and Hollywood will lose its export markets. Have you considered that? Her question was like an arrow aimed at a strategic flaw. Gibson nodded, his eyes acknowledging the question's sharpness. I have, Sonny, but Hollywood isn't a helpless victim. We lead the world in cultural exports, $15 billion in American films sold abroad each year. Other countries might retaliate, but they need our films more than we need theirs. Tariffs are leverage for negotiation, not a wall for isolation. And if we invest in domestic production, Hollywood will be stronger, not weaker. His response was clear, logical, leaving host pursing her lips, unable to find an immediate gap. The audience clapped more enthusiastically, some standing there, eyes gleaming. Goldberg, sensing the tide turning, tried to regain control. Mel, you sound convincing, but this is Trump's policy, and everyone knows he doesn't care about art. You're just doing his bidding, aren't you? The question was a personal attack meant to put Gibson on the defensive. Gibson let out a soft chuckle, not out of anger, but from the confidence of someone who saw the tactic coming. I'm not anyone's errand boy, Whoopi. I'm a filmmaker, and I fight for my industry. If Trump pushes policies that protect American workers, I support them, not for him, but for the millions who depend on Hollywood. Call it what you want. The audience here knows the truth. He gestured lightly toward the crowd, drawing them into the narrative. The studio shook with cheers, the audience standing clapping like thunder. Goldberg pursed her lips, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Bihar and host exchanged glances, realizing Gibson wasn't just holding his ground, he was steering the battle. A producer backstage whispered through an earpiece, cut the shot, he's stealing the show. But the cameras kept rolling, capturing Gibson, turning an attack into a razor-sharp counter-strike. The audience in the studio was still buzzing. The